shoulder seems to be moving forward more on the lateral side. I'll invert the foot a little in 20 degrees of plantar flexion and then pull. Wow, that's really going a lot more on the lateral side. I think he's got an anterior lateral instability. Okay? I think it's anterior talofibular ligament. How could I check to see if the calcaneofibular ligament is affected? Put it in neutral with a line of fibers. I have to put it into neutral or even a little dorsiflexion, but we'll put it in neutral. So if I put it into too much dorsiflexion, the tails will be locked out. Okay? But there's calf tightness, so I'm going to bend his knee. So scoot forward. So I'll bend the knee a little bit to get the calf tightness, soleus, or gastroc tightness out of the way. Okay? Neutral, and then I'll do a talar tilt. Hey, that's loose too. So now calcaneofibular might be affected. Does that make sense? Now some would say you could even do posterior calcaneofibular or posterior talofibular by going into dorsiflexion, lengthening the posterior fibers, and then inverting. That's loose too. I would be checking the other side first. Okay? So all three are gone on him. You're doomed! Okay. So that's the lateral side. Does that make sense? So plantar flex, invert for anterior talofibular, neutral talar tilt for calcaneofibular, maybe even a little dorsiflexion for posterior talofibular. That's the lateral side. Okay? If we were to go back to the anterior drawer and both sides move, which they do, I'm thinking something's disrupted on the medial side. How would I check the medial side? Dorsiflexion, talar tilt into abduction. How does that move? Does that make sense? So if you know where the ligaments go, you know what position to put the foot in to stress it or to put it at length and see if the ligaments are there, they should be taut and stop the motion. If the ligaments are disrupted, you'll have more motion. Okay? Does that help put it together a little bit? Anything to add, professors? Is that okay? All right. Now, while you're here, so that's for the ligamentous stress test. Now, there are several tests to look at syndesmotic sprains, or the anterior inferior tib fib ligament and syndesmosis. Okay? And the first one's called the squeeze test. And that can also check for fracture. Yes?
Sorry, I walked in late, so I wasn't here for the whole thing. Did you do the medial, the deltoid ligament?
We just did that with the abduction. That checks the deltoid and medial side. The deltoid ligament, medial side, talar tilt laterally. Okay. All right. So there's basically 5 to check the syndesmosis, okay, and or fracture. If you guys read the text, it mentions this guy named Brodsky. Brodsky and Associates called this test the distal tib fib compression test. That is our Antonio Brodsky. He made it into the all-knowing McGee. What's interesting though, you don't know that because you got to go on the disk to look at the article that came from because they don't have the references in McGee anymore. So it's like he put all this work in, gets his name in the book, and you can't even read the reference until you go to the disk. It's ridiculous. Anyway, all right, scoot back. So I'm glad he wasn't here because he would have never mentioned that. All right. So basically, the squeeze test is you're taking the fibula and the tibia and you're pushing it together. And you start proximally and you just say, let me know if this bothers you. Is that okay? I'm not squeezing underneath. My hands are around the posterior aspect of the calf, but I'm just taking my forearms and approximating them. Okay? So you're squeezing the tibia and fibula, not the calf, as I understand. Okay? That's how I do it. All right, so if you come down, it's like, does that feel okay? Let me know. Let me know. Is that okay? Ow, that hurts. You come down. That's okay. That's okay. That's okay. What's going on there? Hurts in the middle, doesn't hurt above or below. I'm concerned about a fracture. Okay? I don't know the sensitivity and specificity of these tests, do you?
No, but I know it's better for a syndesmosis injury.
Than for a fracture. But syndesmosis, typically what you'll see clinically is that it gets worse the further down you go.
Yeah, it's more painful on this.
It's more painful the more distal you
But
go.
you can even compress in that mid portion, and it can hurt all the way inferiorly.
Yeah, it'll reproduce down here if it's syndesmosis. So you squeeze here, it'll hurt here, but it'll continue to hurt progressively down as you go. If you think about the syndesmosis, you're talking about that ribbon-like material between the tib and fib, and when it tears, the anterior inferior tib-fib ligament is really about right here, across here, okay? It's more lateral than it is medial. And when it tears, that rips, and the tib and fib separate as the talus push up into dorsiflexion. And the anterior part of the talus is wider, so the tib and fib separate, and then it rips the retinaculum, or the syndesmosis, and it's like taking a sheet and perforating it, and you, like that, okay? So it rips up the leg. And so the more stress you have on it, the more dorsiflexion with a little rotation, the more you're gonna have that rip. And so it could tear or clear up, you know, up to the, well, the 1/3 up the leg maybe. So when you squeeze it together, you'll have, even though you're approximating it, you're not separating it out, that change in position is gonna be uncomfortable. It heals, but it takes a long time. So you gotta mobilize it and keep the tib and fib approximated. So you probably aren't gonna want a lot of dorsiflexion. You'll mobilize in the boot for quite a while. But oftentimes, it's underdiagnosed, and so people don't know they have it, and then they're walking around with it all the time, and it gets progressively worse. Sometimes they're treated for stress fractures or other things too. So you wanna watch that. All right, so that's the squeeze test. And then basically distal tib-fib compression test is the squeeze test at the tib-fib, which is more indicative of anterior inferior tib-fib ligament disruption and or syndesmotic strain. Okay, and again, you just squeeze them together. And when you're practicing this, practice again, you know how I'm about the forearms. Get the forearms approximating one another as you're coming down. You can do it, you know, like this. But if I'm seeing this as I'm doing it, that's going to get a better force across that. Okay. All right. Now go ahead and sit down so your knees flexed. Do this in order. The other syndesmotic sprain test is external rotation stress test, or of Kleiger, right? And essentially, go ahead and scoot back a little. Would it be better to do the other leg, or just have to? Can you get to the foot? Here we go. Not that far. There we go. Thank you. All right, so the knees at 90. We stabilize the leg, and I like taking the foot in this position into neutral, or retrograde as they call it, so 90 or 0 degrees dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. Okay, 90-degree angle, calcaneus with tib-fib. Okay, and then you basically just externally rotate the foot like that. All right, and you really don't have to worry about stabilizing the tibia. You just want to stabilize the leg so the leg isn't moving. The tibia is going to go into external rotation and then stop at some point, and then the foot will continue to rotate against the tib and fib. If you were concerned about instability of the tibia, you could stabilize the tibia, and you might get a little bit more stress with that. Okay? Does that make sense? And you're basically, that compression of the talus and the tib-fib is going to approximate a little, and as you twist, you're going to separate the fibula away from the tibia, which is going to stress it more. So oftentimes, that's how it happens, is, I didn't shave, sorry, but as I take a step down, I'm dorsiflexion, and then I rotate, and my foot externally rotates, and then it causes a tear here. Okay. Questions? Let's practice those.